The topic of today's talk is going to look at how the investment world betrayed climate change, which is a punchy and combative title there, Nick. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how you can answer that. And just a word, I think, to Nick, about who's in the room here. Mostly, I think, looking at around, we've mostly got representatives from Strathclyde, be they students or staff, but I think we also cast the net a bit wider for this as well, and we may find folk who are not outside, who are actually outside Strathclyde. So welcome to those as well, and welcome to staff and students. Great to see so many faces. I will invite you, Nick, to share slides if you have them.
I don't.
No, that's absolutely fine. So what I will ask everybody to do, please, I think you're all muted anyway, if we can keep muted. I've discussed with Nick, we won't pause for questions during his presentation. However, if there are points of clarification, i.e. you simply don't understand something, be it acronym or terminology or whatever it is, feel free to ask those. Also, please ask questions along the way in the chat bar, and I'll hold those until the Q&A at the end. And of course, we'll have a more traditional Q&A after we've heard from Nick. So I will cease and desist and give the floor to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me to address this audience, which is a great privilege and a treat. You are indeed, your role in Green Angel Syndicate has been very important in helping educate us, and hence your status as an honorary member. And it's a real delight for the boot to be on the other foot and for me to enter your environment and to be invited to give a talk on this subject. So I want to talk to you about how the investment world betrayed climate change. Forgive me if I'm telling you at any stage things that you already know in detail. I'm not familiar with you, and so I don't know the levels of knowledge that you have about climate change or about investment and the investment world. But I want to mine into some of the detail, even though you might already be familiar with it, because I want to really expose what's gone wrong and what's going wrong. And so my talk will really start with what has happened in terms of climate change, in terms of the policy and rhetoric development around climate change, that's brought us to the position we're in, and how the investment world operated in the trajectory towards 2021 and the place we presently find ourselves in. And in a way, I want to use that to expose the mistakes, and in one sense, it's quite personal, and I will be coruscating about what I believe to be personal failures. And that should be held accountable and recognized. On the other hand, I will also be structural, and I'll draw attention to what is, if you like, a more theoretical reason for the failures in the investment world, and indeed in our wider attempts to address climate change. And then where I want that to take us is to ideas about what we should be doing. What we should be doing in terms of investment, what we should be doing in terms of actions, what we should be doing in terms of innovation. And that will lead me to expose a little bit about what I myself do and what Green Angel Syndicate does, because it relates. So I hope that will be of interest. I'm going to talk until I'm going to stop myself at 20 to 1. I think that's the correct thing to do, Matt, isn't it? So that you've got time for Q&As. So let me start by saying I will sound messianic at times, but this is not messianic. What I'm talking about now is entirely practical. We are living with a practical problem, not a philosophical or ideological problem. It's practical. And let's just rehearse how we got there. Let me start by talking about how the world has discussed climate change, and then I'll talk about what's actually happened. And it's interesting, the gap between the two. We've known about climate change for years and years. I mean, it was first mentioned in the 1850s is the first serious discussion about the problems caused by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But perhaps the landmark publication in recent years was The Limits to Growth in 1972, published by the Club of Rome, which was relatively really explanatory about the problems we were coming on to. In 1980, the young Al Gore established his Senate subcommittee on, I think it was on the environment specifically, but he initiated an inquiry into climate change specifically in 1980. The 1980s limped by in terms of response to all of that, although there was a lot of positive response, not least from the oil and gas companies led by Exxon in the States. And in 1989, just as the Reagan administration ended, just as the Trump administration is ending today, and the George Bush Senior administration started, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, was formed in 1989, and they held their first meeting, which was in effect the first COP, in Noordhout, a small town on the north coast of the Netherlands, at which the first climate change treaty was put on the table. And it was vetoed by America, the UK, and Japan. So that was the first failure to agree anything. Brundtland produced her Brundtland report in the same year, creating the concept of sustainable development. In fact, I think that was 1988 rather than 89. Sustainable development was born in Europe and was the centerpiece of the 1992 Earth Summit, where it was adopted. And that was rather more successful than the first COP in 89. The COP in turn led to the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, which was the IPCC. We found ourselves starting to do things about climate change, and yet we realized it was not enough, and that led Al Gore to produce An Inconvenient Truth, which stunned the world in 2006, followed by the Stern Report, actually, which I think was the same year, which was a UK government report, but it went worldwide into climate change. 4 years later, COP15 in Copenhagen was a shambles, produced nothing. 5 years after that, in 2015, everybody heralded COP21, the Paris Agreement, as being a great breakthrough. But in 2018, the world was stunned by the IPCC special report into the impact of global warming, which revealed cruelly how the modeling had got in successive periods throughout, really from 1989 onwards, the modeling of the impact of climate change was shown always to be over-optimistic the time the last model had been produced. And so in 2018, the IPCC special report revealed that the basis of understanding in Paris in 2015 was erroneous. And in fact, we were almost inevitably bound to hit 1.5 degrees by 2030, 2 degrees by 2050. It was a shattering moment. We had been operating on the complacent basis that we had the problem in hand, and instead we were discovering we didn't. We were operating on the basis that the work we were doing was for future generations and our children and grandchildren and generations to come. We discovered that in fact we were facing the problem now. We were then further astonished when the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Report on Biodiversity, came out in May 2019, and that told us something that was even more shocking. We had been basing everything we did in climate change on the assumption that if we got the man-made emissions adjusted properly, then we could depend upon natural ecosystems to do the rest. What the biodiversity report revealed in 2019 was that we no longer could. That the consequence of the feedback loops, the consequence of the continuous damage to the different ecosystems ranging from the Amazon, the rainforest in the Amazon basin through to the ice cap in the Arctic, the erosion of the ecosystems that we were causing had reached a point where it doesn't really matter. This is their calculation. It doesn't really matter what we do with human-generated carbon emissions if we do not ensure that at least 40% of the solutions to climate change are nature-based solutions. We won't succeed. It will inevitably fail because we require the nature-based solutions to restore the ecosystems. And if ecosystem regeneration does not happen, our natural ecosystems simply will not do what we require them to do in order to make human life sustainable on the planet. They will fail to do it. And all the various consequences will happen. The sea level rise, the increased heat, the increased drought, the increased flooding, and so on. So that's what's happened. That's what's brought us to today. Let's illustrate that gloomy picture with the figures that lie behind it. The critical figures being the particles of carbon per million in the atmosphere. Back in 1960, they stood at 310. By 2005, they were at 380. They're now standing at 415. This is the highest level ever in the history of the human race. Indeed, we think that the previous highest level of carbon in the atmosphere was 300 particles per million, which was achieved 300 millennia ago, 300,000 years ago. Why does it matter? Well, because the heating effect, what happens is the carbon particles concentrate in the atmosphere and prevent the sun's rays from reflecting and escaping back into the atmosphere. What that means is that the temperature on Earth warms. What that has meant is that for the last decade, it's warmed by an average of 0.13 degrees. It's warmed by 0.13 degrees on average per decade for the last 50 years. And that, of course, is very patchy, but the overall, when I say it's patchy, it's warmed much, much, much quicker at the Arctic, slower at both poles. I think probably slower in the tropics. I mean, the UK is what James Lovelock, the Gaia theory chap, calls an island lifeboat. And he thinks that that's what we're going to end up by depending on, island lifeboats. We're very, very lucky. The warming effect in the UK is on the whole rather a pleasant thing, and it's not harmful at all. The harm, however, is enormous in two ways. It's huge harm where the temperature rise is much greater, much more extreme. But most of all, of course, the temperature rise causes the climate to change. And it's the way the climate changes that is really, really dangerous. So that's where we've got to. I don't need to rehearse anymore. I'm sure you're aware enough of all of that and of why we've reached the problem. But the point I want to make is here we are in 2021, looking at a problem that has been apparent since 1850 and been apparent as being a really, really serious problem since certainly 1972. One might have thought that in a rational world, the existence of a threat to human life, such as climate change, when known to be caused by economic activity, would lead those at the heart of economic trends to do something to change them. But in fact, for the last 3 decades, until that sensational 2018 IPCC report, the investment community, for one, has done little or nothing about it. Now, in what I've also just revealed is that the political community has done little or nothing about it as well. But this talk is about the investment community. I will revisit the political community, but I want to concentrate on the investment community, but because they could have done something about it. But in reality, what they did was little or nothing. the concepts of sustainable investment or ethical investments both were developed in the noughties, the fairly early noughties, you know, in response to the Rio Earth Summit and the Kyoto Protocol and all of the publicity and the narrative that was being generated. But what the investment community treated it as was something that was niche, marginal. It couldn't deliver a good return, they believed, and they felt it had greater reference to philanthropy than high return investments. There was a small surge in what was called clean tech investing, and that was the name given to the sector. What it actually meant was renewable energy installations. And that happened both in the UK and the US, and indeed further afield. And it lasted for most of the noughties, but the returns were poor, and then the financial crash in 2008 just really knocked it on the head. And you got to a point where even companies like BP, for example, backed out of renewables themselves. I mean, the oil and gas majors, who were the companies that should have been doing most in it, because they were not believed to be profitable. However, and this is what I want to draw attention to, they continued to claim things like corporate social responsibility and later ESG, environment, society and governance, as part of their purpose. Whilst claiming it, they continued to spend, the oil and gas sector particularly, but lobbying groups all over the world, but particularly in America, and to a lesser extent here, continued to spend millions, if not billions, on campaigns to undermine the importance of climate change. The oil and gas industry in the States regularly ran campaigns explaining why climate change was not in fact a threat, directly undermining the science of it. Now, when we've got people who know how to make money, as the investors do, out of people who know how to make money, as the producers do, out of doing something for the customers, communities and governments they serve. In other words, investors. Investors are investing in listed companies who are the producers. And the companies are doing something, and the investors are investing in the companies continuing to do something. Why do you imagine that something that they do would be bad? And even worse, why would they have spent the last 3 decades claiming that it was good? And here is the absolutely savage indictment of these people. The answer is shamingly simple: greed. And it's greed that is propelling the investment community into change as well, because they now think they will make more money if they do change. But is the change real? That's so my deep criticism of the investment community is that they are people who've done harm to us and our world knowingly. They were investing in companies that they knew were doing harm to our world. Those companies themselves were taking the investment and using it to continue to do harm. They talked about CSR and ESG, and essentially what they were doing was being paid liars. They're hypocrites. They were saying that they were doing something good whilst knowing that they were doing something bad. I think that they deserve the deepest possible criticism. I think that our politicians deserve the deepest possible criticism. We have been badly led by our leaders and badly served by our economies and the companies that drive our economies and get the most out of it. And to whose benefit? Only to the people who get the money out of them, which is the investors and the companies themselves. So now they're changing, and let's look at the way they're changing, and my criticism will continue. Is the change real? They've started since 2018, 2019, they've really started to pour, the investment community has started to pour money into the things that are variously called sustainable investing, ethical investing, socially responsible investing. All of these terms are used. ESG is used a lot. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are used a lot in the investment community. I mean, the figures are startling. In fact, just this week, the Financial Times weekend, that last weekend, reported that ESG investing took off in 2020 with 6.7 billion pounds invested in the first 3 quarters of the year. Now, that sounds great, doesn't it? However, what does it mean? And let us be precise now. What does it mean? It is impossible to be precise. There is no regulation that defines what it should mean. There is no standardization in terms of definition of the terms, and as a result, there are no commonly shared definitions. There are no standard metrics, and that means that allows the whole of the investment world, and indeed the whole of the economic community, to blur what it all means. And meanwhile, the world burns, it floods, it sickens, and it dies in front of us. ESG allows a variety of different outcomes. The UN Sustainable Development Goals allow a variety of different outcomes. ESG, obviously, environment, social, governance. And so what then happens is that people adopt these things. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, there are 16 or 17 of them. They're all different. In 2019, Morningstar, the analysts, the American-owned analysts of the financial sector, reported that there were more than 250 funds that had repurposed themselves from traditional to sustainable. A proportion of those made absolutely no other change apart from the name and the presentation of the fund. BP, for example, is in some ESG funds because it scores well on governance. Governance is how you treat your employees. It's doing nothing for the environment other than making it much worse. But nevertheless, some ESG funds will say, you know, we're good, we're ESG, we're doing this. Meanwhile, they're putting money into something that is only doing us harm. Also, in 2019, another thing that Morningstar reported was that something called the LNG Future World ESG UK Index, which is in fact a fund, it's a fund of funds, had nearly 11% of its holdings in tobacco, alcohol, gaming, and defense stocks. How can you call that good? Yet ESG provides it with this banner of good. A year ago, in February 2020, Deloitte predicted that ESG funds could make up to 50% of the total of professionally managed investments by 2025. But they will not necessarily be helping the environment. That's what Deloitte itself said. And in any case, what about the other 50%? Oh, well, they're still doing the old traditional investing in whatever they like, which can be doing any harm it likes. So I want to draw attention to something that is, I said at the beginning, this is practical, not messianic. I'm making a practical point. If we use the language of ESG, the language of ethical, the language of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are themselves practical, but there's 16 or 17 of them, what we're doing is creating an opportunity for the people whose behavior has been characterized by greed for the last 30 years to carry on doing what they're doing, because what they can do is hide behind all of these. They are awful terms. ESG is the wrong term. ESG shouldn't be used at all. What we're doing is fighting climate change. We're not trying to fight environment, social, or governance. We're fighting climate change. It's a practical point. Climate change derives from global warming, which derives from an overconcentration of carbon particles in the atmosphere. What we have to do is put that right, not put something called the environment right, not put something called society right, not put something called governance right. One of the biggest tests of the value of any idea is whether it uses language to communicate something to someone else that relates to the reality of the world that you both inhabit. Go out into the street and talk to ordinary people. well, not, it's pretty difficult at the moment, but nevertheless, talk to ordinary people and refer to them ESG, and then explain it's environment, society, governance. You'll be there for 20 minutes or half an hour trying to explain what it means. And at the end of 20 minutes or half an hour, they still won't necessarily understand what it means. Language is required to be precise. And that's my separate criticism from my personal criticism of these horrible people who've done what they've done to us. The theoretical criticism is we have allowed language to be corrupted and exploited by the people who mean to do us harm. That includes the politicians. It includes George Bush Sr., who was the one who vetoed the original climate change treaty. It includes George Bush Jr., it includes an awful lot of politicians who hid behind language. Let us use the language that relates to reality. Ditch sustainable development was the most awful gift to our world. Who could understand what that meant? Absolutely no one. And I mean, I went to conferences around the 2000, 12 years after Brundtland invented the term. Conferences in the UK were held, the theme of which was, what does sustainable development mean? And if that's a problem you're suffering from on the basis of the theory that you've developed, really change the theory. In fact, what needed to change is the language by which the theory is communicated. But that just never happened. And here we are, 30 years later, and too little has happened. And it's now late in the day. So now, if I can put that point to one side, but let us never lose sight of it. Let us make sure we always talk about the reality of the problem we've got to solve, not somebody else's jargon that they're using to pretend they're doing something useful. What then do we need? We have delayed and prevaricated for so long that the question now, and once again, here's the practical point. Let's get this out into the open. The question of getting carbon management right or wrong now, this year, next year, and the year after, will determine whether or not the future of the human race on the planet is sustainable or unsustainable. Once we've said that, nothing else matters. The investment community can invest in health tech, med tech, it can invest in IT. It's not going to make any money in the long run if we don't get carbon management right, because our world will be so compromised that all of those sectors really won't be operating. If we accept the basic premise that the issue of getting carbon management right or wrong is what will determine our futures, sustainable or unsustainable, then that's all that matters. It does represent, ironically, the biggest investment opportunity in history. The entire global economy has to transition from a hydrocarbon basis to a non-hydrocarbon. That means every single sector of the economy. Look around you. Look around at the things in your room. Look around at the things behind me here. They're all generated. They're things that we use. My mug, my laptop, everything here, my clothes. These are things that we're using currently, largely generated from a hydrocarbon production system. They've got all to transition to non-hydrocarbon. What that means is it's a systemic problem, which is an integrated challenge in which we have to examine the machinery used. It's practical. The machinery used and the products that are produced in every single economic arena, and change them so that they're not being generated by processes that require a hydrocarbon basis. What that requires is an attention to detail. I mean, and that's why it's such a huge investment opportunity. It's an attention to detail and innovation at a micro level, which allows incremental changes, small changes, but that accumulate to make every process change and shift. It's not a grand sweeping transformation. It requires absolutely constant granular change. Now, that cannot be achieved without investment at grassroots level. And it's got to go from grassroots level right through to scale. So the big companies are important. It is important they are engaged. It has to be allied with judicious regulatory change. I mean, our governments across the world have to tax the oil and gas sector out of existence. They've got to do it. There really isn't any choice. We cannot continue to drive carbon emissions into our atmosphere at the rate we're still doing. Green Angels, so that's, I mean, I'm going to tell you a little bit about, and end with a little bit on Green Angels Syndicate and where it's targeted, to explain why I set it up in the first place to address this problem. Green Angels Syndicate was set up to be as an experiment in 2013, and then I gave up what I was moonlighting. I then gave up what I was doing and took it seriously and relaunched it in 2017, and it's then grown. I'm pleased to say it's grown and become quite successful. And it was set up to be the only angel investment syndicate in the UK specializing in the fight against climate change and global warming. And that specialization was absolutely crucial to try to generate startup companies that were developing innovations in technology and process that would make a difference. And that's why I wanted to do it. I wanted to create a vehicle that was concentrating on what really mattered and was not being vague or woolly or trying just so that I still had the freedom to invest in things which might have nothing to do with climate change because they would just make me richer. I wanted Green Angel Syndicate to concentrate purely on things which will make me richer. They've got to succeed if they're going to make a difference. It's no good if they go bust. But what they've got to succeed at doing is something that's going to make a material difference to the fight against climate change. And that is measured in terms of carbon emission reduction or carbon removal to reduce from the 415 particles per million. That's the only way it can also be calculated in terms of greenhouse gas emission. So you can include methane and the other greenhouse gases in that. But the primary thing is carbon. And it's simple. It's a simple, practical objective, and the activities it's engaged in are simple, practical activities, investing in and supporting and stimulating the startup companies that are producing the innovations that we need. What does that mean? It means that really the focus areas that we like most, although we will look at anything that does make a difference, the focus areas that we like most and that we know most and that we're most effective specialists in, which is another reason for doing most investments in them, are resource use areas. So companies that are developing innovative technologies and processes, which could be hardware, could be software, could be a mix of both, in relation to all energy and all the sectors that represents: energy, energy generation, energy storage, energy efficiency, energy trading, energy distribution, energy big wide, and then the other resources that are incredibly important: food and food production and agriculture, water, waste and recycling, natural resources. And the reason for there's a reason for this which is entirely commercial. These are the resources that we need to live. We cannot live without food, we cannot live without water, we can't really live without energy. That being the case, it was my original hypothesis that no matter what happens to the global economy, money will be made out of the right innovations in these sectors, because we cannot live without them, and yet we know we've got to correct our use of them. Because again, it's the abuse, the misuse of these resources that is largely to blame for the problem we're in the first place. So we've got to put it right. We can't afford to delay because we've got to continue with these. The economic paralysis that we're currently in as a consequence of the current pandemic makes the point for me. So the UK and global economy shut down last March. It was shut down for 3 months, but these resource use sectors remained economically active throughout that period, and they remain economically active now for that very reason. We can't do without them. And lo and behold, the Green Angel Syndicate, I'm delighted to say, continue to grow. We continue to get good deals, more and more good deals. We're making more investments. We continue to get more and more members joining the syndicate, which means that we can invest more. And so the whole thing is growing. And I'm delighted about that. And that comes back to the point that by common consent, it's not my point, Mark Carney has made the point, Al Gore has made the point, climate change is the biggest investment opportunity in history, according to both of those men, which is a phenomenal observation. It starts with the grassroots because the radical innovation is what's possible at grassroots level. I don't need to tell you this, you're a university. The big multinationals can't do it, the corporates can't do it. They are not good at radical innovation. What they're good for is scaling. The reason they can't be good at radical innovation is because their first objective is always to keep the company going. And the company will only be kept going adequately by continuing to do what it already does. So you can't expect it from them. What the government can do is regulate them so that on the one hand, they stop doing the harmful things. On the other hand, they adopt the innovations that come through. And the other thing that they can do is support us, which they are doing, I'm pleased to say. So that's what Green Angel Syndicate does. And our targets are to do more and more and more of it. We want to grow. We just launched our first fund. We're hoping to expand into much larger funds so that it's not just angel investing, but to bring the Green Angel brand with it. So the Green Angel promise of specialization, climate change focus, and really getting involved with the companies to make sure that they succeed in making a difference in the fight against climate change. And that's where I'll end. It is now 12:40 precisely, according to my clock. So Matt, I'll stop there if that's all right, and hand back to you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Nick, and spot on time. So we'll take questions from the floor, and just what I will ask you all to do, please, is if you can raise your virtual hands to ask the question. I'm hoping you've got the functionality to do that. Eloise, do they? I don't see it on my screen. Doesn't look like we do. Not sure why. Okay, so don't worry about that. So if you can maybe just in the chat bar just say question please, and I'll give you the mic. Okay, but we did have a question from David Scott during that. Stathis is saying we can raise a hand, must just be by computer. So raise your hand or put it in the chat bar and I'll get to you. Question from David. David, do you want the mic for the moment, just to sort of put that to Nick?
Yes, please. So it's basically, and thank you, Nick. That was hugely reassuring that you're on it. Now, I know, and I've been involved with a lot of people. We've been campaigning on this sort of stuff for the last 3 and a bit decades. And right now, it's very easy to be an environmental campaigner. It's very easy you can get a vegan meal anywhere. But 20 years ago, you guys, if you will forgive that expression, made our life miserable. And so an awful lot of the people that already have a lot of these solutions are now so switched off from institutional investors that I'm scared we're going to miss a trick. We're going to have to reinvent the wheel. These guys have already got spinning very quickly indeed. So how can we either collaboratively or individually reach out to these existing ethical businesses and persuade them to scale up in a way that would support our ambitions?
David, I think you have to do your own due diligence. I mean, the cruel conclusion of my characterization of the investment world and the business world is that you still have got a lot of very, very ill-intentioned people out there who don't care. Unfortunately, the way we've developed the whole narrative means that it is all too easy for them to hide behind what appears to be a green agenda. The only way to check out the people you're talking to is to go in deep and find out what they're really doing. Ask the difficult questions. If they can answer them, then you know you're onto an organization or a team that has integrity. If they can't answer them, then steer clear. We do this all the time, I might say, David, because we're looking at new companies all the time. And indeed, we're looking at some that are incredibly obvious. We've been courted by both BP and Shell, and they both wanted to get us involved in their venture arms. We won't do it for its integrity, it's reputational reasons. We can't work with a company that's spending billions on continuing to do the very harm we're trying to fight, whilst what they want us to get involved with is just a mere bagatelle to them. You know, it might be 100,000 or 500,000, but you know, we won't do it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I should say, if we can ask for affiliation as well. Sorry, David, I didn't ask for that, and we didn't catch it.
My apologies. So yes, I'm a doctoral researcher at the Punter Centre for Entrepreneurship.
Wonderful. Thank you, David, because I know we've got a real mix of people on the line. So that would be great. If you can just start with your name and affiliation. We had questions from Ranjit Thomas, and I see John's got his hand up as well. So we'll go in that order, just one at a time if we can, please.
Thanks a lot, Matthew. So, hi, David. From my point of view, I look after the MSc in entrepreneurship, and I know quite a few of my students weren't able to join because they're in lectures today. But I think a hot question would be, if one of these would-be entrepreneurs have an idea for launching this, Nick, how would one reach out? You know, what's the selection criteria? It's just the practicalities. What do you assess, you know, potential venture investment on? What's your yes, no criteria? Some guidance for these students would be really, really helpful.
It's relatively simple, Ranjit. The criteria for judging are all the same as any investment team would make of a startup or early stage company, in terms of their product, whether it's unique, the competition, their awareness of the competition, their intellectual property, their financial projections, the quality of the team itself, its evidence of demand and its connection with its potential customers. So all of those are just conventional business judgments that you make. The one that overlays it all is quantifying the carbon emission reduction or the carbon removal.
Got it.
And we need to see that quantified. We want and need to see it as a real figure that they can sign up to.
Great. And the students for the semester 3 work on a virtual incubator project. If one or two of the groups have something that may fit into your cadre, would it be okay for them to approach you afterwards through Matt to say, hey, you know, we have something that we think kind of ticks all the boxes?
It would. There are at the moment, and in the history of Green Angel Syndicate up till now, there's been a slightly unsatisfactory challenge, which is that if they're too early stage, our members won't be interested and won't invest. Okay. And so if they're too early stage, we tend not really to look at them. We just say, look, come back when you've reached, when you're a bit more developed. In TRL terms, that means TRL 6, 7, 8. You know, we like demonstrator stage, proof of concept stage. We don't like lab stage. Okay. However, things are changing slightly, I'm pleased to say. We're actually about to launch our own, well, we're just planning our own accelerator. It's not quite an incubator, it's more of an accelerator. There is another option. This is specifically for the companies we are turning away because they're too early stage. And there are lots of them. We turn away companies in their hundreds. We just don't have the bandwidth, unfortunately. But a lot of them are really good. They're early stage, and we're having to say no to them. We're setting up this accelerator so that we have the option of saying, come into our accelerator, we'll put you through an 8-week program, and at the end of it, the idea is that you will be ready to pitch to the syndicate.
Okay, so I'm sure I can share details as and when they're ready, Nick, with the university staff and students alike. So thank you, Ranjit. Question from Thomas and then to John, please.
Thank you, Nick. That was a great talk. My affiliation, I'm a student at the Hunter Centre doing the Entrepreneurship Management and Leadership course. My question was, you mentioned earlier about how a certain number of, well, one of the solutions has got to be nature-based. I think you said something along the lines of 40% of all solutions have to be nature-based. How does then the investment world, or how does Green Angel Syndicate look at this, and where do you see the opportunities in terms of nature-based solutions?
Well, it's a very important and meaningful question, and there are various different nature conservation groups that are wrestling with it, because it's so difficult to make some aspects of nature-based solutions actually economic, make them make money. So something like rewilding, for example, it's difficult to see how do you make money out of that. However, we have invested in a rewilding project, and we know we are making money on it. I'm delighted to say it was very cleverly put together by somebody actually who came out of the solar industry, and he put it together in a way that the revenue is generated. And so it is, but I mean, in a way, that's a model project. So I hope others might follow it. There are other really pure, hardcore nature-based interventions that need to happen that just won't make money. And I think in the end, governments have to pay for them. But there are a lot of really interesting. So in total, we've got 4 nature-based investments. One of them is called Nature Metrics, and they've developed a new system for monitoring and measuring DNA quicker than anybody else can do it. And it uses sensors and software, and they can basically survey a water body or a land mass and tell you what species are present and in what quantities. So not instantaneously, but compared with the speed at which it's currently done, it is a different league, and that is transforming the way that biodiversity bodies are able to work. So one of our honorary members is chief executive of the World Conservation Monitoring Centre, and the World Conservation Monitoring Centre is looking at buying the products of Nature Metrics. There's another funny one that we invested in that I was suspicious of, and I'm still not absolutely convinced by. And that is Nature Space Partnership, which specifically has a system for monitoring the presence of the great crested newt, which is a service that all construction, new build construction projects require in the UK, and that's why it can make money. It's a good service. So that's a third. I can't remember.
Okay. Well, Nick, do you mind just? I know we've got John and Motaz. We've actually got 2 more questions, and I just wonder whether we can, if we have time to squeeze those in, that would be wonderful. So, John, you've been waiting patiently and with your virtual hand up as well. So, thank you.
I'll take that. I'll remember to say that now. Thanks very much, Nick. I just find this utterly fascinating. I've dropped you a LinkedIn request because I want to carry on the conversation. So I took money, I choose to chair a wave energy company up in Inverness, and we took money from Shell, Technology Ventures, all sorts of early support from Offshore Structures team in Aberdeen. And then the greed thing kicked in. So I kind of, those comments about, at one point, I was very cynical. I thought it was a PR puff. It wasn't, the individuals weren't, but they lost the support at corporate. Those are the days when you had a double-page spread in the FT and all the papers about what Shell was doing for the environment, and it got pulled. Everything got pulled, and they're back in. So absolutely, stay away from the bastards. Anyway, the thing I like about what you're doing, and it builds on the question that Ranjit asked. So I run program. My role in the Hunter Centre and the business school generally is running growth programs for companies. and we look at different stages. We don't do absolute startup because it's really, really time consuming. I used to chair the Gabriel Angel Syndicate, which was Strathclyde's pre.
I know well.
Yeah.
I know well. The lovely.
We never found that way of taking someone. Wait a minute, this is just too much work to get it to proper investable level. I think the team have done a great job on that. The question is, my big issue with investing through a fund rather than a syndicate is that there's inevitably a fund life. So as you grow Green Angels, the brand, into something else and attract the right type of investment, perhaps from family offices, how do you overcome that? I've seen it too often where suddenly it becomes about the carried interest and all the mechanics of being a fund manager rather than doing the right thing. So slightly lengthy question. But
I think in some ways you don't. I mean, if we go into fund management, we'll aim to run an effective fund management business. Our own business must be effective if what we do is going to be effective, and that goes for the syndicate business and for the and for fund management. So I don't think we do, John. I think we are bringing two things to fund management, though, which are we want to hang on to, which make us special. One is the purpose, the absolute commitment to the purpose. But the second is the syndicate association. So we carry the Green Angel brand with us. The Green Angel, the assets of the Green Angel syndicate business include 220, actually it's now 230 members, amongst whom there are people with deep embedded specialist knowledge in the markets that we invest in. So the original specialist knowledge has expanded out. And it expands out and expands out and expands out. You know, if you joined Green Angel Syndicate and rolled your sleeves up and got involved, your knowledge would be part of the pool that is available. Now, there is no fund that has that kind of pool of knowledge. The big funds don't have that kind of pool of knowledge. They have employees who are employed as specialists. They don't have 230 people sitting behind them. So we've got this absolutely unique power that we want to bring to bear, because this is what makes the difference. We are not interested in our investments failing. We're not like, I know and love Gabriel. I think Gabriel's a wonderful syndicate, and I think what you do is very, very good. We're not interested in failure. If any of our companies fail, then we have wasted time and we've wasted money, and climate change isn't going to wait for us. It's not going to wait for us to get our heads into gear and work out how to invest in companies which really are going to succeed. So that makes our approach to fund management very, very different.
Love it. Thank you. Love it.
Thank you very much, Nick. Listen, I know people have appointments at 1 o'clock, so I think it's only right if we wrap things up here. Mott has apologies. I know if you've got a question, I think Nick graciously shared his email, so maybe you can connect with him directly. So sorry for that. I just want you all, please, to join me in thanking Nick for making the time. That was a really, really excellent and wide-ranging discussion there. So many thanks indeed, Nick.
It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime, and hopefully we can actually have you around in person and spoil you as and when restrictions allow. So thank you very much. There's obviously lots of room for collaboration going forward. So students, staff, feel free to reach out to Nick, and likewise, Nick. I know there's a lot of students, PhDs, masters, all looking to partner and project with these kind of things. So hopefully this is the beginning of something exciting for a number of you. So thank you very much. We'll see you all at the next seminar. And until then, take care, stay safe, and speak soon. Thank you.